Hey y'all, you're listening to
Two Wives and a Spark.
As an interracial couple, we've learned a lot over the years, and we're committed to sparking conversations that build community and explore how race influences everything. Literally everything. So that's our focus for this podcast.
Because we believe that intentional conversations are vehicles for change. We've seen the power of them in our relationship over the years, and we know that when we really listen to each other and to ourselves, we see the truth in new and revealing ways.
I'm Leah.
And I'm Rachel.
You're listening to Two Wives and a Spark. Hey y'all, in this week's episode, we're learning more about what it takes to move from knowing to doing. The action, right? Not just knowing the things that are happening in front of you or around you or in the world, but then knowing what to do with that. Knowing how to act, knowing how to show up. The quote we're going to bring to you this week is by the amazing and infamous James Baldwin. And the quote reads, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced."
Whew. It's one of my favorite quotes.
It's a powerful one, a very powerful one. I think the idea of facing something inspires action. Showing up to face something that you know could possibly be really hard and challenging from you, that already inspires some action.
Yeah.
It inspires a shift within oneself.
It does. Last week's episode, we talked about how you show up matters, and this idea that facing and starting to really hold up the mirror for ourselves and facing ourselves and thinking about, how am I showing up? Mm-hmm. What is the version of me and all the layers of me that impact this conversation about race and all the work? There's just so much about this quote that we could dig into. And we think it's really grounding for today's conversation because there's a lot in the work that we do. Professionally, people are always talking about kind of wanting to get unstuck, wanting to move the work forward. It's not moving fast enough, or it's moving too slow, or there's maybe too much to do and it's overwhelming. And so we have a lot of energy around this topic because both personally, we've learned the power of incremental steps, all the micro moments that matter so much in the action work, but also that there's just so many layers to this. So in a lot of ways, we're, again, kind of going to get to the tip of the iceberg, if you will, around all the ways that this conversation plays out.
Yeah, I was thinking about the stickiness, I guess, of being stuck. In my experience, what I find gets in the way when we are dealing with something that's complex or something that is even simple, but we're stuck. Because one of the reasons why I think that is because we lose the moment to connect to each other. I think we are fixated on the outcome often in the world, which is the topic that we're talking about, right? When we're talking about racism, that is something we should stay fixated on. It is something we should stay trying to figure out how to solve. But I think when people get stuck in the day-to-days, the incremental steps that it takes to really break down the foundation of this country, I think when people get stuck, it typically goes back to not wanting to have a hard conversation, going back to I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Doing the hard thing.
Yeah.
I think that sums it up. Whether it's a conversation, whether it's some insecurity that you have, some fear or some perfectionism around, I want to do it right. There's so much kind of what we see and talk about as analysis paralysis. A lot of people intellectualizing this work and then staying stuck in the intellectual space and not like actually taking the lessons from the book that they just read and applying it. And we've been there. And so I think we like to ground these conversations in some of our real life examples of how this has played out and what we learned over the years that can help kind of move the work forward.
I mean, when I think about facing something that maybe I have avoided trying to face or have been nervous to face, oftentimes I'll speak vulnerably. The most recent thing that I've had to face is my relationship with my brother, which has not always been strong, the word I'll say. I think we are two very different people who are trying to navigate the world around us. And I think there's love there, but I think we are both just trying to navigate the world around us. And we recently were in the same space together. And before I got to the space, I remember putting my guard as far up as I possibly could to not have to face being in the same space as him. But I think the love that is rooted in who we are, because we've been siblings our entire lives, is what help break that down to then face each other, be siblings with each other and show love to each other and be supportive of each other and put all the rest of the nonsense and the noise aside. And so I think sometimes it takes figuring out what you're willing to, how you're willing to move in certain situations in order to do the outcome, get the final outcome and face the thing that you're avoiding.
And I think underneath that is, I'm just taking it in, and I think there's some overcoming of some fear that's underneath that. First, understanding what is it that I'm afraid of? Like, what is the thing that is causing this discomfort or deregulation? And then once we know, oh, okay, I know why this is making me upset or angry or sad or confused. And once I know what's happening, then I get myself ready to face and be in that space.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Like, what's the fear? Being able to answer that question. And I think in this situation for me, it's, I don't want us to say something to each other that might really make us not ever speak to each other again, or I don't want to not have you in my life. I think the fear is you're going to lose if you face it incorrectly or if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And I think oftentimes that's what's rooted in our insecurities and our worries about facing things that might be hard. Is we're human, right? And we're afraid to make the big mistakes. So we're afraid to lose. I think that's the other piece. We are taught at a very young age to win. Win. Everything is about you winning individually. And there's a very individualistic culture that we're all raised in here in the States, that I think gets in the way of facing some things that are going to require you to possibly lose sometimes or fall flat on your face, but you got to get back up.
Right. I think that's such a powerful example, because I think that we all have relationships in our lives that every relationship goes through seasons, and you being vulnerable and sharing that there's the particular season that you're at with that relationship is potentially a little bit, there's some rain and storms sometimes, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
And we all can relate to that. I think, and I appreciate your vulnerability, because it's how, when we think about at the core, what we're all wired to do, our unconscious mind, and kind of we'll make more connections to unconscious bias later, but our unconscious mind is really wired for self-preservation. Our unconscious mind is doing its job when we avoid discomfort, because it thinks discomfort equals lack of safety. And so we're really having to rewire our brains in a lot of ways when we have everybody has their own schema and own experience with discomfort and their own kind of wiring around things that we avoid and relationships that are hard. And for most people, conversations about race and conversations that we know we cannot control the outcome of because they're so distinct depending on the person, we're setting ourselves up for deregulation. And so
to be out of control.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so then what we've learned in our experience is we have had really hard conversations and been able to have really hard conversations with each other because we trust one another. Even if I'm not sure how you're going to respond to something I bring up and you're not sure how I'm going to respond to something you bring up, there's at least in the foundation a sense of trust for us to be able to come back to. Like, we know, regardless of what, feeling or emotion may come up or how we're dysregulated, we know we'll be able to come back and unpack what that was, because there's a sense of trust, which I think brings us to the focus in this episode, which is just around no one can do this work alone. No one can face what we're talking about in our society solo. I think when that happens, the weight of it is so heavy, and it can require you to get lost in a lot of ways if you're trying to do it all by yourself. And so I think a key part of that is really knowing that when you're facing something so big, you can't do it alone. You actually don't want to do it alone. I think you do want to do it with others so that they can help you gain perspective and knowledge. And
I think, our whole hope is that this podcast sparks a bigger conversation, that it inspires our amazing listeners to reach out to somebody that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have a conversation about race with and say, hey, let's listen to this together and unpack it together, right? So our bigger mission is to hopefully catalyze more conversations so that one by one, spark by spark, we can create more harmony eventually. And so I think, that piece around, we have to have relational trust, and trust takes time. And we talked about this last week. And so I think we want to ground this episode in a story around, where did our trust building really begin? Let's go back to the very beginning, before we even started dating.
Back in the day.
And we were on a professional front, we were beginning our friendship, really. We had established a connection professionally, and we were realizing, actually like you. You're like a really good person.
For sure. I think we definitely were two different parts of the school for a little while, but I think when that piece happened around, oh, you're a cool person to work with, or, okay, you're talking about something I'm intrigued by. That was my experience. And so I think for us, the trust building really started in a consistent, what we used to call Tuesday talks at our old school. And I think, that time that was set aside and kind of was protected didn't have a clear outcome at first. I don't think either of us knew we were going to eventually get to this place where we kind of were co-conspirators in a way, right? Learning what the other person needed before we went into these meetings, or knowing what the other person needed to speak up for something in the school. And I think they got to that place, but I don't think that that's where they started. I think where they started was really, it was about just building and getting to know each other as two leaders on the campus, and kind of unpacking the week and understanding how you could have done something differently, or how I could have done something differently, or the absence of my voice or the absence of your voice where it was needed.
And this theme of going from knowing to doing, I think it showed up so differently for us, but we like to normalize, if we're all committed to learning, then we're all in different places on our learning journeys, right? And so I was in this very deep learning journey around racial equity and understanding a lot that I didn't learn in school. So I was in this space of really in the knowing space and stepping into the doing space. I had just come back from grad school. I had just done all these seminars and institutes around racial equity. And I was trying to take all of what I read and turn it into action. And you were on this journey starting out as a leader. We were both starting out as leaders.
I mean, I've always had leadership skills, but I think for me, I was in the knowing phase around, I know I'm good with kids. I know I can support any student you bring my way just because I've either been where they're at or I had friends that were similar to them or whatever. That part of my knowing I wasn't shy about that. I knew I could do my job. I think where I went from knowing to doing was realizing I didn't always know how to shift. I'm Shep, I'm the person that kicks it with the kids. Kids tell me things, and then I have that information. I didn't then know how to translate it into our system to make our system better for kids until our Tuesday talks, right? I think those really helped me figure out that not only did I have information, but I had information I can then do something with to change systems for kids.
Yeah.
And that still to this day is an aha moment for me. Because I would have been just cool being Shep. I'm on the playground. You come talk to me about life. I know who's dating who. I know whose mama want me to make sure to give them the mama look. I know all that stuff. But I wasn't translating it into the bigger system. I wasn't doing anything with it besides knowing it and feeling good about knowing it.
I mean, I think I claimed for you. You were starting your leadership journey because other people saw you as a leader of adults. And you were like, no, I work with kids. Yeah. And so people gave you titles and held up the mirror for you, I would say, because you didn't know your influence at the time. No. You had a tremendous influence over people, and you still do. I always tell you this. For those who haven't worked with her in schools, she is like a kid whisperer. She is the most talented behavioral support dean, student support, whatever you want to call it, restorative justice practitioner, like all the ways that she's always... She helps kids change for the better so they can see the best in themselves. That's what she does. She helps. I mean, it's I could go on forever. But
thank you. That was really sweet.
That's why I was drawn to you. I think people are really drawn to when you see someone in their zone of genius. You have a superpower, and kids admired you and adults admired you. Everyone always thought Shep that was her nickname. She had this secret power to change kids' behavior who had done something and maybe not so great. And she would just connect with their soul and get them to really rethink their choices. And to this day, she still does that. But I know working with her for those 4 years, I saw that other adults watched very closely what she did, and they emulated what you were doing.
And I was doing that without any awareness. I think that there was something different that I was doing. In my head, you work with kids, everybody's doing this, right? You're trying to find the best of who they are and help them see that.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, I've worked with incredible educators who have made me who I am today. And I think what made my growth better, what helped me face world of education and figure out like what I wanted to do in it was then understanding how to connect the dots from knowing how to do what I felt like I was born to do, to then being clear about how do you change systems then for kids?
Yeah.
Like, how do you start doing the work that's going to change these inequities that help kids have safe zones and have those be their schools? And I think truly my confidence was built in a space where I could feel it when we would have those weekly talks, because then I had someone that looked different from me, who understood the system different than I did, who I was able to bounce ideas off and get a different perspective from, and then enter these spaces with purpose, right? And not just be like, cool, I'm at the table.
Yeah.
I bring the Black identity to it, but no. I bring that, and that's part of that. Yeah, I get that as a part of my identity, but also brings so much more. And I'm aware of what else I bring. I got clear about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that we all have kind of our zones, and I think one of my zones of comfort is systems. I love to see when there's something that's working, how can we scale that so that more people get to experience it? And that's what we talked a lot about on those sessions. It was just very informal. Tuesday after school, just informally, the conversations began where it was, hey, we both don't have a meeting at this time. You want to just debrief the week and talk about things that we're working on? And it was very informal. Like, I would come to the table and be like, hey, I noticed you didn't speak up in the last meeting. What was that about? Because I was trying to get better at facilitating conversations about equity and race and all the work we were doing to interrupt some of our discipline disparities.
I think for me, I'm actually having this reflection like right now. So bear with me, listeners. I hadn't actually been at a table of influence ever. And that was the second school I had been in. So I guess I think back at it now, and I wasn't supposed to be at that table either. It was just kind of the structure of our school. And so I didn't know how to, for lack of a better way, I'll admit this, how to act at that table. So I was just acting the way I would act with kids. I did not bring my adult learning brain to the table. Cool, I'm here for the kids. What are we talking about with the kids? And other stuff, that's not for me. I don't know about our academics and all. And so it took a minute to really make those connections and face the fact, no. You were on this team as a leader.
Yeah.
You too do need to know about the academic disparities or the behavior disparities. You're not just the cool auntie, you know what I mean? Like, you have some responsibilities for the sake of kids.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I think the light came on for me to know, oh shit, I have some stuff to do. I have some work to do. But then I had no idea how to do it.
Well, that's such a deep point, right? Because I think it's funny that you said it was just in the structure of the school, because it was not. It was created the year that you were asked to join it. We saw a gap. And so we started, and I was doing work around racial equity with Mark, and we were seeing the patterns. Mark Salinas of the National Equity Project, shout out. But we were doing that work. There's a long way to say, it's just so interesting. I had the privilege of basically creating that table because I had a position of authority. And so what I saw, I was also kind of eyes wide open because I had never been at a position of authority. Like, that was my first big leadership role. And so I'm thinking, how do I reimagine things so that I don't have an experience like I did when I was a teacher? I'm going to think outside the box because our leadership was so open to innovation. And so I had the privilege of working with a principal who was open to creative solutions, thinking outside the box. Shout out to Killian Bedlock. Okay, you want to create a team? Okay, let's do it. Yep, this is grounded in data. If I just had permission to really innovate. And so then I think what comes with, that quote, like, with great power comes great responsibility, in real time realize, oh, this is what happens. This could easily be just the assistant principal and the principal on this team, or you could invite all the people who work with kids as deans of those grades and come to the table and brainstorm solutions that are going to take more time. And so we put a lot of time into that. We had a retreat, we had weekly meetings. Every week I was designing agendas for that space and trying to unpack, like, how do we have conversations about race and these really big disproportionalities? Like, we were facing extreme disproportionalities in who was getting referred and suspended to the office was really in your face, not matching up with our student demographics. And so overwhelmingly, it was Black boys that were getting sent to the office. And so we had to unpack that and talk about what were the biases, what was happening, why was this pattern happening. So I'm in real time going from knowing to doing and trying to unpack both. Weekly. Yeah, every single week for an hour and a half, I think, right?
Yeah, it was a long.
It was like a good time. Yeah. And so in those Tuesday talks, we were both kind of as learners. I think that something that would be a big takeaway is that space allowed both of us to kind of get over our own fears. Right. And to normalize, ooh, this is messy. Like, that was the first time I've ever facilitated that. How did that land for you? Or why didn't you?
And as someone who was at a, meeting for the first time, I had no past experiences that I could relate it back. Whereas now I bring stuff up like that all the time. Well, like, we could try this style of agenda because it had these outcomes before, But then I was so fresh that it was genuinely just authentic from my natural state of being. Oh, well, that part was boring because I didn't know what what's it called? What did you call them? She used to always try to get visual with us. What's that?
Imaginal.
The little broccoli pieces.
Oh, metaphors. I would bring everybody.
She would bring metaphors in, and I'd be like, I don't even know what you said after that because I was still trying to figure out what that was. What is it?
A fractal. Yeah.
And she would relate it back to the different pieces we had going on. And then I would be stuck on the Friday, be like, girl, I don't know, you introduced a new language. You got to bring it to my level.
Well, but that helped. Point, yeah. So you gave me feedback. Of course, not in these terms. We now have the gift of hindsight where we're, oh, wow, that was so interesting. But back then, the more that I see it, you were helping me see that when someone has access to a table for the very first time, there are different steps we need to take to make sure that there's a feeling of belonging there.
And so I think the Tuesday talks helped me create that. Because if we didn't have those and I had to just keep coming to those meetings, I don't know that my own behavior would have shifted because I wouldn't have had a understanding of where I was supposed to be going as a leader on that team. Personally, I understood where the team was trying to go, but what role was I to play to help us get there? Yeah. That wasn't clear to me. I knew what my role and responsibilities were outside of that team. I knew if we were going to look at data that had to do with me, that I needed to make sure I was on point with that data in terms of how to show up in that meeting, how to lift your voice up, how to use the time wisely for the sake of children. Like, that wasn't clear to me. And I think the Tuesday talks and the reflection questions really helped pick apart some of that stuff. Because while we're laughing about it now, but truly I was like, if you keep using these metaphors I don't understand, then how am I going to engage in this agenda if I'm still stuck on the metaphor? So, and that's real. That was my real experience coming to a table for the first time. So I think it was insightful to have that space as someone who was sitting at a table for the first time so that I then could go to doing the work with more clarity and with more consistency and helping my teammates in a way that was more authentic and unified.
I just picture myself with all this broccoli. I talked about how the stem of the broccoli needs to be like the heart of the school. These are our core values, and then we see them live out in all of our teams, and each of the broccoli florets is like a different
I'm over here like,
team.
Did she just bring broccoli to a meeting?
Know, when you're doing something for the first time, you bring all the bells and whistles, but now it's just funny when you look back. And as a leader, I was in my knowing to doing phase where I was bringing all these bells and whistles thinking that that's what I needed to explain the conversation, when in reality I didn't need all that. I just needed to trust my gut. But when you're doing something for the first time, it is harder to know where your intuition is because
you're doing it for the first time. Yeah. I mean, when you said that probably those experiences probably helped you deliver safely too. Like if it was, okay, I got it. If I can get, because you're really good with metaphors. So if I can get it right, if I can get the metaphor right, your focus was able to go into a zone that you felt safer in, right? To then be able to deliver this content where you were learning how to do it for the first time, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. As like every single week facilitating those meetings,
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons we even release this show on Tuesdays is because of that. And one of the reasons we always start with quotes is because of those agendas. They always had quotes so that every voice would be heard because you had time to unpack it for yourself and share what words stood out to you or sentence or whatever. So it keeps going. I mean, we learned a lot during that time, but I think the bigger piece there is just when you are going from knowing to doing, really figuring out, ask your questions to your partner or whomever you're doing this work with, keeping in mind that no one's doing it alone. And if you are doing it alone, then figuring out why that is, as we all need a group or people to do this work with. It doesn't mean that you have to do every single step of it with someone else. There is some individual work, as we talked about in the first 4 episodes. But when you really start getting to this place of action and trying to move things, you can't be solo. Like it's too heavy for one person.
And it's cyclical, right? Ideally, if you're really committed to learning and growing at every season of life, there's something new that you're learning, and therefore you have new knowledge. So you're going from knowing to doing in a new way. Every quarter, there's something new that I've learned that I'm trying to apply in a different way than I did the quarter before. Right. And I think this is like one tangible example, but there are so many ways that this shows up in life, whether it's personally and professionally. And I think we like to talk about that. We've said this multiple times, how much the micro moments matter and those incremental steps. Remember, just pay attention, right? As Leah said, no one can do this alone. So if the structure doesn't exist already, let's give ourselves permission to create new structures and start small. Start with, hey, you want to go on a walk and talk? Because I'm sure that might have been how it all started. I don't know. It was something really small. Yeah, we did
do some walk and talks before the Tuesdays. Yeah.
And so remembering that as you're building a house, you need scaffolds. Here I go with another metaphor.
Get ready, y'all. Get ready.
You don't just randomly throw concrete in the ground and then think about, well, we need to put some walls up. You think about the whole plan and you're like, okay, we're going to need to measure things, take stock of where we're at. What is the new information that I now have that I didn't have? What am I working on? And then thinking about how we're going to actually move forward. The scaffolds help us. The little in-between conversations are scaffolds for the bigger conversations. Yeah. And that helps us put the whole house together eventually. That's always going to be a work in progress, I feel like.
I was trying to think through what's required. You were saying, like, you go from knowing to doing, and then you might be doing something a little bit differently than the first time you went from knowing to doing. For me, when you were doing the house example, I was like, I don't know, I'll just get somebody else to put the house together. Thinking like we might have listeners who have that moment, right? Where it's like, I wouldn't put a house together, I'd just get somebody else to do it. And I think that's one of the...
I'm definitely not a contractor. I don't know how to build a house, but I know that there are some key steps. I don't have any interest.
But I think that was the bigger piece, that was the statement I was going to make. This requires all of us to try to put our own house together, right? It actually is not enough to be like, oh, I'm going to just fund the people over there to put the house together. Or I'm going to just give a shout out to the people over there so that they can keep putting the house together. It actually, this work, when we talk about how do we create racial harmony in our society, it isn't enough to do it from a distance. And it isn't enough to say, that's too hard, so I'm not going to do it. Because it is. This shit is hard, right? And even in this episode, we have fumbled kind of what our point was for originally and then came back to it. Because I think it represents the hardness of what we're talking about. And I think when you are doing something new, you are going to fumble. Yeah. But if you don't get back up and face it, the fumble is the last thing that you'll have left versus getting back up to face it, right? Yeah. And so I think there's work there. And so I would say to people to think about the last time you faced something that was really hard and what it took, what steps it took, and jot that down and then start thinking about what you currently have going on in your world where you want to move it from just knowing about it to doing something about it. And this could be, it could be at your job. It could be in your neighborhood. It could be within your own family. I mean, there are different arenas you can go into, but how do you take something from the knowing phase to the doing phase? I think requires you to think about the last time you've done something hard and what steps it took for you to face the hard so that you can then understand kind of how you navigate hardness.
Yeah. And also tapping into your source of perseverance and determination. Like we all have that in us. We know how to get through hard things very contextually. And so in this space, I'm so glad you brought up, y'all, because this is the third time we've sat down for this episode. Like the first time we were like, is it this story? Is it this? What's the real heart of this? And I'm glad that we had these 3 weeks that I'm really glad we have the amazing producer and support system that we do, because we were 3 weeks ahead and now we're recording 1 week ahead because we had that buffer to really think, what is the most important? How do we go from knowing to doing ourselves as we're sharing these examples from the past? And so understanding sometimes it takes time. Sometimes you have to get back up after you fumbled. Most of the time you do. And I think staying committed to the work is so key, and remembering that there is no way through this without imperfection.
Oh, yeah.
Truly. And so sometimes action looks differently for everybody at this phase, going from knowing to doing and thinking about when you last did something hard. If you can take it a layer deeper and think about relative to conversations about race, relative to racial equity work, racial justice work, when was the last time you showed up, leaned in? When was the last time that you noticed something or observed something and then did something about it? When was the last time you spoke up when you witnessed a pattern or an inequity? When was the last time you stepped back when you realized you were taking up a little bit of space?
Yeah.
When was the last time you really listened instead of speaking because you felt that was the biggest action step that could take the work forward, right? Yeah. So it just looks differently for everybody, I think. And I think also taking stock on what are those micro spaces in your life that help you synthesize what you're learning and prepare and think about what your next steps are going to be. And it might be this podcast. This might be a micro space that you can unpack with somebody. I mean, I hope that can help.
From this week, though, it would be great to hear from folks. I say this at the end of every week, and we do hear from folks, but I think to hear what is something you're grappling with in terms of going from the knowing to doing that we could process with you or talk with you about, because I think that would be really cool and powerful, right? I think it would be super helpful to think about the things that you're going from knowing to doing within your own personal lives.
Yeah, let us know. We love hearing from y'all. And we, from episode 5 to now, 3 weeks later, we've got hundreds of people with us now, not just Belgium. We got multiple countries and states. And I mean, y'all are just bringing us so much life and light. So thank you for joining this conversation and sharing it with your friends and using it as kind of kindling for sparking your own conversations. We see you and appreciate you beyond words.
Until next time, friends.
Take good care. Sending you
love and light.
Thanks for joining us today, y'all. We'd love to stay connected on Instagram and Facebook, so you can find us at 2 Wives and a Spark, all spelled out.
If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend so we can keep the sparks of connection going. If you want access to our episodes as soon as they drop, click that subscribe button. Every rating and review helps others find us, so thank you in advance for letting us know what you think.
And special shout out to Journey Girl Magic Productions.
I'm Leah.
And I'm Rachel.
Thank you for listening to 2 Wives and a Spark.